Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to the episode of Cheap Shots, the ultimate series for miniature wargamers who want stunning tabletop quality miniatures without breaking the bank. In this series, we'll show you how to save money on your miniature painting hobby by using affordable craft paints, budget-friendly tools, and clever techniques. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned hobbyist, you'll learn how to achieve incredible results without the premium price tag. And on today's video, we're going to show you guys how to paint a team of Slaangor for your armies of Heathen Knights of Slanesh for your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And by following the tips and techniques and the materials that we suggest in this tutorial, you'll end up with a grand total savings of $183.28. So that being said, let's go and talk about how to paint up a band of Slaangor for your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. So the first thing you need to do, of course, is to assemble your miniatures. Now, for full disclosure, I'm not actually using these Slaangor as what they're intended for in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I'm actually planning on using them for a Mordheim warband called the Cult of the Possessed. And in that warband, you're allowed to take mutants as well as possessed, which are basically just monstrous creatures. So these guys represent 2 possessed as well as 1 mutant in my warband. So I'm not sure if I kind of assemble these guys optimally or not. But regardless of the case, just go and assemble your miniatures any way you want to. And the next thing you got to do, of course, is to put texturing on the base. So for the texturing on the bases, I just use a really simple wood glue mixture is what I basically do. What I do is I paint the entire base in wood glue, and then I dust the base with sand that I get from my backyard. And then once I let that dry, I then make a 50-50 slurry, which is a combination of both wood glue and water, and I apply it like a wash all over the entirety of the base. So that way it dries, it creates an airtight seal that keeps the texturing from flaking off the base. So once you guys get that done, the next thing I gotta do, of course, is a primer. So priming is an important step in miniature painting. What it does, it creates a good surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. Unfortunately, if you take your acrylic paints and put it directly onto bare plastic, the slightest bit of friction will cause your acrylic paints to rub off, ruining the finish of your miniatures. That's why primer is a really important step. Now when it comes to primer, of course, you have different types of colors that you can use for your primer. For me, because I'm going for a more vibrant paint job, because I'm doing an oil wash on these miniatures, I'm going to go with a flat white primer. I use Rust-Oleum flat white primer. I get this stuff from my local Walmart, and I just do it once over with a primer, and once I let that dry, I can start applying my base coats. So for my base coats on this one, the first thing I'm going to work on is on the flesh, and there's quite a bit of flesh exposed on these miniatures because they are Slanesh miniatures, so of course there's going to be a lot of flesh showing on that. And I wanted some variety of skin tones in these Slaangor, so I actually chose 3 different colors. I used flesh apple barrel paint, as well as burnt umber, as well as nutmeg brown from the same company. I get these all, of course, on my local Walmart. I put 2 thin coats on all the parts of the flesh that is exposed on the miniature, and I just get a good solid base coat, so that way I have a good base to work off of for dry brushing. And as you can see, it just does 2 thin layers on that. It looks absolutely fantastic. And now that we're done with the base coat, we move on to a dry brush. So the miniature that I dry brushed in flesh earlier, I just basically decided to do a little bit of Peaches and Cream by Delta Sarin Coats, do a quick dusting of that. For the miniature I did in burnt umber, I used territorial beige, and for the miniature I did in nutmeg brown, I just dry brushed it in flesh with apple barrel paint. Now the apple barrel paint you can get at your local Walmart, while the Delta Sarin Coat you can get at your local Hobby Lobby. Now dry brushing is an important step in miniature painting because what it does, it creates the illusion of depth in your miniatures. The pigment of the paint actually adheres to the raised surface of the miniature while leaving the darker base coat in the recess of the miniature, creating that illusion of depth as well as 3-dimensionality. So once you just do that real quick, you're ready to move on to your guys' next base coats. And the next detail we're going to paint real quick on the leather elements of these miniatures as well. So these guys are Slanesh miniatures. So they have stockings, they have masks, they have like these like chest rigs that they wear on themselves. They have belts and buckles all over the place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint all parts that I want to be black on the miniature in 2 thin coats of pavement paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for a pretty low price. And the reason why I'm using pavement paint is because it does have a slight bit of texturing to it. And the nice thing about that texturing, of course, is when you do a dry brush into it, it does a beautiful job of highlighting those details. Just put a good solid base coat of 2 coats of pavement and ready to move on to our next dry brush. So the first color I'm going to use for the dry brush on this is going to be Pewter Gray by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart. And as you can see right off the bat, there are some little bit of a texturing showing up on the leather bits on the miniature as well, and also creates some nice highlighting as well. But we're going to dust this one more time with another color to bring that highlight to the surface. And that last color we're going to highlight with, we'll just do a quick dry brushing with some Pale Gray by Folk Art. As you can see, it brings a lot of those details we couldn't see earlier. Things like the individual texturing of the leather, as well as some of the jewelry, as well as some of the iconography that's on the leather pieces as well. And once we're done with that, we're ready to move on to some more base coats. In this case, we're going to work on the sashes that they're having around their waists, as well as the claws that they also have as well. Now, to bring out that color, I'm using 2 thin coats of Wild Iris by Apple Paint. It's a nice, rich, dark purple. I just put 2 thin coats of that directly on all the parts that want to be purple. So, for example, like the claws of the Slaangor, as well as the sashes that they're wearing, just put a nice, solid base coat so that way we can do a quick dry brushing and bring a lot of those details out. So the dry brush I'm going to use is a color called Princess Pink. It's by Adidas Acrylic. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby. The reason why I chose this color is because it's a nice pale kind of like fuchsia color that also contrasts nicely with all the dark purple that we have from the Wild Iris that's in the claws as well as the sashes. As you can see, we did quick dry brushing. You can see a lot of the detailing we couldn't see before. Things like the texturing and the scales of the claws, the individual fabrics of their sashes. Just do a quick dry brushing on that and ready to move on. Now, a quick little note about dry brushing. It's very easy to overdo dry brushing to where you make the pigment too light. So that's why, in my opinion, the best way to do dry brushing is to do it in successive layers, and you can bring it to whatever level of brightness that you want, because it's very easy to add more layers of dry brushing, but it's very difficult to go back to the base coat. So the next detail we're going to focus on are the hooves of the Slaangor. For that color, we're going to use 2 thin colors of burnt umber in order to bring out that detail. So we're just going to find the hooves on their feet and pick those out in 2 thin layers as well. It contrasts nicely with the black stockings that they're wearing, and that's the reason why we're using this color as well. The next detail we're going to work on real quick is on the fur tufts at the end of their tail. For that color, we're going to use Tuscan Teal by Apple Paint, just because it's a nice complementary color to all the purples that's in this unit, as well as to the blacks, as well as the different flesh tones that we have. It contrasts nicely with those colors. Just with 2 thin layers of Tuscan Teal, you can get this at your local Walmart. So next detail we're going to work on are the horns as well as the hooves of the miniatures. Once again, we're going to dry brush the hooves of the miniatures with some by khaki paint, by Apple Paint. As for the horns as well as the spines of their claws, we're going to pick that on 2 thin layers of khaki paint as well, giving us a good solid base coat to work off of. It's a nice brown color that has like a nice bone color to it. Not too dark, not too bright, but just contrasts nicely with all the other colors that we have on these miniatures. We're also going to dry brush their tails real quick that we did earlier in Tuscan Teal with some Dutch Aqua by Folkart. You can get it at your local Walmart as well. We're just going to do a quick dry brushing with that just to bring out those individual tufts of fur on their tails. So with most of the base coating as well as dry brushing finished, we're now going to move on directly to the painting of the metallic elements on these miniatures. And we're going to use 3 colors in order to use that. For all the gold jewelry that we're using Deco Arts Emperor's Gold is a beautiful, rich golden color, and we use this quite a lot throughout the miniatures. Things like the jewelry along their horns, as well as the jewelry on the claws, as well as the loincloths and belts and buckles that they have. We're bringing a lot of those details out to the surface. Another color we're also going to use too is Anniversary Silver by Apple Paint. It's a nice bright silver color that has a little bit of a blue tinge to it, and we're going to use that directly for the shoulder pads that they're wearing, because I want to make those shoulder pads look like they're kind of like reflective, and that they're mirrors. We're also going to do that with some of the little mirror iconography that they're also wearing on their jewelry as well. And the last thing we're also going to use is Gunmetal Gray by by Folkart as well. We're going to use this for the blade of the axe carried by the leader of this unit, and we're going to put 2 thin layers of this metallic color on all the parts that we want to be metallicized. So with all the metals taken care of, the next thing we got to do now is start working on the individual pieces of jewelry on these characters. We're going to use 3 colors for this. We're going to use Tuscan Teal for some of the things that are hanging off of them, like feathers, for example, tufts of fur. And we're also going to use green turquoise or Apple Paint to do things like the actual gemstones. And the reason why is because these gemstones and that green turquoise color contrast nicely with all the earth tones on these miniatures, as well as the purples that these characters are wearing, as well as the black and the gold. So we're going to use that to go put little 2 thin dots of this green turquoise on all the jewelry that these characters are working on. And then when we're done with that, we can start working on the bases. So one of the details we're going to work on the bases first are pieces of ruined masonry that these bases are standing on as well, so that way it matches the rest of the warband. For those pieces of masonry, we're going to put 2 thin coats of Skyline by Folkart. It's a nice bluish gray color that kind of contrasts nicely with all the purple, and then we're going to move on to the actual sand texturing on the bases. Now for all the Slash miniatures in the studio's collection, I like to create this kind of purple colored base to make it look like it's something from the Warp or from the Realm of Chaos, just because I like to make my Slash miniatures look very colorful with this purple color. So to create that effect, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint all the sand texturing on the base in 2 thin coats of Concord Grape by Apple Paint. It's a nice kind of like medium kind of purple color. Just put 2 thin coats directly onto the base, and then ready to move on to the next detail. Now if you do notice, you do see some of the white undercoating kind of picking through the 2 layers of Concord Grape, but that's perfectly fine though, because we're going to dry brush these bases with some pale gray. And in this photo, we do exactly that. We take some pale gray by folk art and we dry brush the entirety of the base. So this includes the skyline pieces of masonry that we did earlier, as well as the individual sand granules of the sand colored base as well. It creates this kind of weird, kind of grayish purplish color that kind of matches perfectly with my idea of what the realm of Slanesh would look like, being kind of weird and supernatural as well. So the next step we're going to use, of course, is an oil wash. Now for this step, most people like to use Army Painter Strong Tone, which is a wonderful product that does exactly as advertised. The only problem though is it's quite expensive. So for my oil wash, I like to use Midwax Polyacrylic and Mission Oak Color instead. You get it at your local Walmart for about $7, and what I do is I thin it out with some water or some paint thinner, and I apply it like a wash all over the entirety of the miniature. Now the reason why we're doing this is because the oil wash does a couple of things. The first thing it does, of course, is it seeps directly into the miniature's recesses and brings out a lot of those details we couldn't see before. Things like the gaps of the armor panels, the texturing of the clothing, the musculature of the miniature, as well as the texturing on the bases as well. Another thing that the oil washing also does too is it smooths out the transitions between our dry brushing as well as our base coating. As you can see, that chalky pastel look that we had earlier is now completely gone because now our base coats and dry brushes have been blended seamlessly. And the very last thing the oil wash also does too is it darkens down the value of the colors that we use on the miniatures. As you can see, they're not as bright or vibrant as they used to look. The colors are now very subdued, and that's the reason why we use such bright colors in the first place, to account for the fact that that oil wash is going to stain it and bring that value down. Now when it comes to oil washing, you do have to wait for 24 hours for this stuff to dry and cure, because there is polyurethane in it, which will dry and create a high gloss finish that will protect your miniatures from the elements. So my suggestion to you is to use this as the last step of your painting process, and then return to it the very next day and start working on the rest of the miniatures. So one of the last details we're working on is on the rim of the bases. We're going to use some pewter gray by Apple paint, put 2 thin coats along the rim of the base. The reason why is because that's what I do for all the Slanesh models and the miniatures in the studio's collection. It makes that kind of nice contrast between the purples as well as the gray, and also kind of brings the entire miniature together. The very last step, of course, is completely optional, but I like to use a matte finish on my miniature, so I use matte varnish spray by Krylon. I get this from my local Walmart. I just spray the entire miniature once over with that matte Krylon varnish to kind of mute down the sheen of that high gloss coat. And as you can see there, now they look perfect. You can see a lot of the details, and it also has a beautiful matte finish. And there you guys have it. This is the end result of all of our work using our cheapskate method to paint up these miniatures. And of course, if you end up using everything that we recommend in this list for this video, you're talking about a grand total investment of $39.41 in order to paint up your miniatures using the cheapskate method. So now that we're done talking about using the cheapskate method, let's talk about exactly what materials you need to buy from Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to achieve the exact same results we did, but using those name brand paints instead. Alright, you'll need to buy a can of Corax White Spray, which costs $17, as well as the colors Thunderhawk Blue, Wraithbone, Baneblade Brown, Averland Sunset, Rust Gray, Ulthuan Gray, Genestealer Purple, Dakala Lilac, Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone, Baylor Brown, Slanesh Gray, Eshin Gray, Flayed One Fresh, Fulgrim Pink, XV88, and each of those colors costs $4.55 a piece. You also need to buy some Astrogranite for the texturing, some Pterodon Turquoise, Leviathan Purple, Wildwood, Lead Belcher, Screaming Bell, Ironbreaker, Retributor Armor, and all those paints cost $7.80 a piece. You also need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone for $32 as well from Army Painter. You also need to buy a can of Moratorium Varnish for $19.50. And of course, you need an Army Painter basing set, which would cost $18.99 to put the texturing on the bases. Now, supposing that you're buying everything for the very first time from Citadel as well as Army Painter, you're talking about a grand total investment of $222.69 in order to paint up your miniatures to the standard that we did. Now, when you subtract that from our cheapskate method of $39.41, you have the grand total savings of $183.28. So there you guys have it. That's the way for you guys to paint up your Slaangor, only spending $39.41 as opposed to the $222.69 you'll need from both Citadel as well as Army Painter. At the same time, bring your miniatures to a beautiful tabletop standard with a total savings of $183.28. So there you guys have it. That's good for this video. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. I am Commander Cheapskate. I'll catch you guys next video. Peace out and stay classy.